For those of you who know me, I'm, I don't need to introduce myself, but for those of you who don't, I'm Barbara Maxwell, the University Director for Interprofessional Education and Collaborative Practice. And I happen to be a member of Ramesses, which is an amazing group of people across the globe who are invested in realist evaluation. And are building an evolving methodology for realist evaluation and realist synthesis as well. So I come with that kind of perspective, and I'm hoping that as we talk about realist evaluation, we'll have kind of a two-way conversation, because I'd really like it if you ask questions. The reason why I think it's good to ask questions is realist evaluation requires you to do a little paradigm shifting, and that's often really difficult for people, or it raises a lot of questions based on the paradigm that you're kind of ingrained in with your training. So if you were trained very much in a quantitative positivist way, then realist evaluation may be a step away from some of your absolute givens, your views of causation, your views of how things should be designed. And if you're a quantitatively trained person and you've been embroiled in the evaluation of social programs and things like that, you're really comfortable looking at Marshall from public health and thinking that, in the, is that me wiggling? No? In the public health world, program evaluation is really quite routine, quite normal. It's the nature of the beast. And so it fits really well with people who have done program evaluation at that level before, who've done evaluating national policy implementation, things like that. But it's equally good for design. So if you're designing a program, an educational program, or a health-related program to deliver to people, it's equally valuable for that. And it's really good when you've already made something and you maybe rush to make it. We're great at making stuff in education. We create, curriculum, we create programs, but we haven't really had the front end thinking of how those programs really are expected to work and what exactly we expect to happen to the people who participate. So it's really good for that. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to clear as we talk about realist evaluation. Okay, so I'm going to make an argument to you, and I hope it's not a stinky one. I hope it's one that you can roll with, that you can kind of buy into, about why that step into the middle is actually really can be really quite beneficial, particularly with some types of evaluation, some types of research. So I'm hoping, as I said, that we can have a conversation as we go through. So please ask questions, please, ask for clarification. It just makes it a lot more fun if you're not listening to me droning on. So realist evaluation, as I said, is about programs. It comes from the work, the particular brand of it that I am selling you the argument on is Ray Pawson and Nick Tilley's version, and I'll talk a little bit later about what's unique about their perspective. But it's all about programs and trying to look to see, are they effective, do they work, and if they work differently in different places or at different times or with different people, why might that be? So the standard question that we ask, I'll draw on my world in interprofessional research. In my world, people in IP are always asking, we're always asked the question, does it work, does it work, does it work, does it work? Well, the first and foremost problem with that is interprofessional education and collaborative practice is not a single it. It is many, many different things. It has many components. It has 4 or 6 competencies, depending where you come from. It's all delivered in different ways, in different formats, to different groups of students in different settings. So saying, does it work, is really, a difficult question to answer. But when you're trying to look at a program like interprofessional education, you're delivering something and you're thinking, okay, how can I actually evaluate this? What's the program doing? It can be a really useful way to do that. So Pawson and Tilley, I'll give you one of their examples, but you'll see examples from interprofessional education as we go through, but I'll share some of Pawson and Tilley's and Sonia Dalkin, who's an amazing researcher in this area, really young, one of those kids that puts you to shame. So I'll share some of theirs, but Ray and Nick started doing work. Their work is a lot to do with crime, public safety. They're from the UK. And they did some work looking, this will give you an example. They did some work looking at a very well publicized program in the UK for attempting to tackle domestic violence. And what they did was they really publicly arrested, lot of noise, lot of poor, let the neighbors see, really publicly arrested people who were reported for domestic violence. The thought was, you know, you publicly shame them, publicly shame people in front of their neighbors, and it might have an ameliorating effect on their behavior. And they ran the program on a large scale in one particular setting in the UK, and it dramatically dropped the recurrence rates of domestic violence. So of course, what do you do when a program really works and you've had such great success, way better than you think? What do? Replicate it. You run it somewhere else. So this is exactly what they do. People are picking up this program and running it across all different areas of the UK. We're going to get the same. We're going to get domestic violence down. So the next place they actually ran it, it dramatically increased the rate of domestic violence. Same process, same procedures. So why? This is the heart of realist evaluation. Realist evaluation asks the question, why? Here's the same program delivered to two different areas in the same nation. Why did they get such dramatically different results? Well, when Ray and Nick did their work, they actually found that the socioeconomic mix, the employment rate, and the connection with the community was different in the two areas. So public shaming in the first place affected the person's own standing within the community. It could affect their employment. It could affect all these different contextual elements that were important to that person. So their reasoning was very different when they chose not to commit more domestic violence. In the other area, it was a lower socioeconomic area with high unemployment and poor community cohesion. So the community was not connected together. It was a lot of individual people, not a lot of community networks. So public shaming in that environment only made the person angry. And they hadn't got the same investment in the community. They didn't have the same employment issues, and got results. So realist evaluation looks at all those reasons why. So for programs, it's not saying that you put something in and you know what you're not going to get out. It's all about patterns of outcomes. That not that don't expect the same thing to happen. Expect a pattern of outcomes when you implement, particularly social programs. And this is, the next two slides are borrowed from Tricia Greenhall, who is at the Oxford Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine. She's a wonderful physician doing a lot of realist work in health. And it kind of describes, she told me that she put this slide together. She had to put all the little people, all the little boxes and all the little beetles, what they look like, individually in as she was designing it. And she did it one Christmas Day when all her family had eaten dinner and they all fell asleep. So this is courtesy of Tricia. And so the whole idea about this is that when you put a program in, some kind of program that you implement, the meshing together of the people, the contexts, and the resources that you provide, so that's the three little people, beetles, and cubes, start to interact with each other in different ways over time. So if you took a snapshot here, you may see one thing. If you took a snapshot here, you may see another. If you took a snapshot here, they're starting to diverge. Something different is starting to happen. So she starts to think about the complexity of what happens when people, societies, technologies, all types of things, what happens when you actually implement. She's looking at the policy level. So when you implement policy, a public policy, but it could be a program, could be a community action program, could be a public health related program, you're going to see this divergence of what happens to people because they interact under different circumstances in different ways with the resources that you give them, and it makes them think and act in different ways. So here's another example. So again, you're introducing some change, your program, policy, resource, or whatever that you're giving, and you see different patterns of outcomes because of the interactions. So it's again not expecting that input equals output. It's saying there's other things that are happening and they change what you expect to happen. So does this resonate with many of the clinical issues or issues that you see when you try to implement your own research or your own programs? Different things happen. We usually call them outliers. If you were quantitatively trained with me, they're outliers. You make some account for them and you leave them behind and you walk away because you're really interested in what's generalizable. But in realist evaluation, you're really interested in all of those different patterns. So this is just an example of some systematic reviews. I could give you page and page and page of these systematic reviews that come from my world of interprofessional education. And in interprofessional education and collaborative practice, dozens and dozens of systematic reviews over the last 10, 15 years, trying to answer the question of does it work? And what do you think they come out with? Depends. Yeah, sometimes, maybe, depends. And so these are all of the common problems that pose evaluation challenges in my world of IPE. Lack of theory, not explicitly or implicitly done. Poor alignment of theory with what's designed, so it's lacking some substance. Intervention variability, different methods applied, different populations, different durations, different intensities. Participant variability, the people in it are from different programs, different ages, different lengths of time in their educational program. The outcomes are poorly measured. There's a diverse range of them. They're in different contexts, practice, the classroom, organizational, national, clinical, didactic. But the big things is this heterogeneity. The heterogeneity. There's no homogeneous. There's no it. There's many, many it's. And so doing systematic reviews is not helping us in my world of interprofessional education. It's not the right tool for the job. We just can't do it because we're trying to say, does it work? When there is no it. There are many, 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 many it's. And so using the methodology of systematic review is not that helpful. We'll keep getting the same answer. They keep repeating them because people think it's the way to go, but we'll keep getting the same answer. So complexity was the last thing on that list. And that's the thing that shapes why I moved to looking at realist evaluation, looking for a method that might embrace that complexity, that sense that it's not an it's not one thing. And so recognizing that interprofessional education and many other programs that we do are actually complex social interventions. They're not a one thing. It's not the same as running a drug trial or an intervention that you can control. I hear many people say they present their work at national meetings or in the literature, and they make excuses, as you would if you're quantitatively focused. They say, now the pharmacology students, everybody else joined at the beginning, but pharmacology couldn't join until 6 weeks into the program. So that's a limitation of the study. And that's the way people describe many, it's a limitation because not everybody started at the same time. And my argument always is, no, that's not a limitation. That's what it is. That's it. Your it is a program that starts for most people here, and then at this point, another program joins. That's it. So look at it. Don't make excuses for it and try to fit it in a box it doesn't fit. So that recognizing that it's a complex social intervention makes life a lot easier because you can start to explore that complexity. So these are the characteristics of complex social interactions. The intervention is at heart a theory or theories, might not be stated, but there's theoretical underlying proposition. It involves actions of people, so you need to understand humans. Certainly in my world of IPE, this is innate. Their intentions, their motivations, what they know, how they reason, and what's their essential understanding of what you're delivering to them. It consists of a chain of steps or processes, and that those chains and steps and processes are not linear. They're constantly changing. This is a great example that Poston and Tilly offer about when you introduce a public health program or a community-based program or their crime reduction and safety programs. It starts in the mind of someone maybe in government who has an idea about, we have a problem and we're going to tackle it. So this is what we're going to do. So they say we're going to give out money to do these particular things, and we're going to, good example is one of Nick Tilley's pieces of, really good piece of work was about, you know, the cameras that they put up to watch you when you're like in car parks and, you know, closed caption. So they're capturing you as individuals walking around the community. So they put them up in car parks as an attempt to reduce crime in the car parks. And they found that it actually, in some areas, raised it, in some areas lowered it, and there were multiple reasons why. But it started in the mind of somebody in government who said, we're going to put up these cameras so that we can watch because it will reduce crime. But as it comes down the road to the people who have to implement it, and then the people who have to implement it are implementing it in different contexts, this chain of steps and processes gets significantly morphed. And so if we're actually going to try to work out what it does, we need to think about that, those chains and how you know, what happens to them as a program actually happens. So you have an implementation theory somebody has, but it morphs significantly as it comes towards being a real program that has legs. Interventions are embedded in social systems, and how they work is shaped by this context. So for us, we might educate students in interprofessional education in the classroom, but if we don't touch practice, we're not doing a good job because we're not having it in that embedded environment. So it kind of argues that issue of, you know, with standard quantitative exploration, if you put in too much control, what's the meaning of it when it actually hits practice? What's that clinical utility? So it's kind of arguing that point. And the interventions, interventions are prone to modification as they're implemented, and they're often open systems, and they change through learning. So as people actually implement it, they'll willfully change it because this is, oh no, this works better. So what was an intention out here? So if you go back to those lovely little people, boxes, and beetles, you can see how those evolutions of a program actually change. So in short, this is kind of thinking about social related interventions. They're complex systems, and you place them in amongst a complex setting. And when you attempt to measure whether they work using the conventional armory that we use for our usual kind of health-related inquiry, it really doesn't, just gives us that homogeneous answer we talked about earlier of, does it work? Sometimes, to some extent, but we can't really say much more than that. And we really want to. We want to know. We don't want to just have what we don't know. So, other issue of that is it's not really useful to policymakers or practitioners because it doesn't give you the clues as to why you're getting the outcomes that you're getting, why it sometimes works, what are the circumstances that might change it, how might you be able to morph it to maximize its chance of success and minimize its chance of failure. So the question really is about knowing the right questions to ask. So does it work? Standard question. The questions of a realist evaluation are the right questions if you really want to explore what's actually happening in a program and not just answer, does it work? If you're wanting to, so the questions that a realist evaluation asks is what works, for whom, in which circumstances, in which respects, and the big thing of a realist evaluation is why. So if you have something, an intervention that you're putting in, would you want to know these answers? Would this be more valuable than does it work? Sometimes does it work is all you need. But for the types of programs that many of us are invested in, these are the types of questions that really add to our knowledge and understanding and allow us to target more effectively domestic violence reduction programs to particular areas where they'll be effective, something else in areas where we know they won't. So realist evaluation is a theory-driven approach to evaluate program evaluation, and there's many lovely authors who've done different theory-based versions. The core principle is making explicit those implicit things. So when I started realist evaluation, the very first question that I ask people is, okay, tell me who all your players are. So often they'll think, oh, there's students, so there's students and there's patients. Because we're working in an interprofessional student-run clinic, there's students and there's patients. Okay, tell me more about the students. So turns out that the students are from multiple programs, which you'd expect, different professions. They're at different stages in their education. Some are senior students who have been out in clinical practice. Some are fresh, absolute newbies who are basically doing anatomy and physiology and haven't touched a patient yet. Okay, do you expect the same outcome for all of those different students? And often, if they've thought about measuring outcomes for students, the answer is, oh well, we use this measure. It's like, no, have you really thought about what happens to a senior student, a junior student, students from different programs, students who have slightly different exposure? And so that's kind of often the first questions that help you to get to picking out those assumptions that people have about what's happening. And once you start to ask those questions, people they have it. It's that implicit, implied theory. They know it. They're able to articulate it really quite clearly. Oh, no, let me tell you about, this is what I think happened. So they have it, they've just not articulated it. So in realist evaluation approach, you're actually making that really transparent. And then you develop program theories, which you then empirically test. And this is where the quantitatively trained, positively trained person of me was quite comfortable taking that sideways step. It was just enough of a sideways step into realism and realist evaluation to be comfortable because I could hang on to this. I could still hang on to this. And if you're qualitatively minded and you're used to gathering and exploring people's perceptions and implicit ideas about programs and things like that, it's a really comfortable little sidestep to go into the middle to say, okay, now I'm going to actually collect empirical data. I'm going to collect, I'm going to survey, I'm going to do retrospective documentation audits, I'm going to, look at big data on patients to be able to answer, see if those things are actually happening. So it's a comfortable sidestep for many people, though it does take a shift in your thinking. So these are some of the things that shift in your thinking. Your thinking has to move away from what's generalizable. When we're only looking for what's generalizable, it gets you into that systematic review mentality game where you're thinking about, oh, does it work? So you're rather than seeking generalizable lessons or universal truths, you're trying to directly address the fact that the same intervention never gets rolled out in exactly the same way, and it never has exactly the same impact because of differences in the context, the settings, the processes, and the stakeholders. Instead, it's explanatory, and you're trying to explain what works for whom and what circumstances and which respects and why. So a slightly different mindset. So you have to think a little differently. So you're thinking differently because it's based on realism. For those of you who don't know much about realism, I certainly didn't when I started this realist evaluation work. you're thinking differently about causation. So a generative view of causation goes, you put in A, and if you control the circumstances, you get outcome B. Okay? A successionist view of causation says you put in intervention A, it hits the ground of your context, your people, your environment, and everything else, and starts to get morphed. And what you get is outcome B, C, D, maybe E, maybe it keeps on going down the alphabet. So it's not that connected, A always leads to B. There's context that intervene to change the outcome. And so it agrees with that there's a real world, there's knowledge, it has all that, knowledge that we have that we would be if we were positive thinkers. But it also argues that we can improve our understanding. So it's not a yes or no, true or false. It's we're building knowledge and we're evolving it and we're changing it. So it's okay to do things and get partial knowledge and a partial answer, because you can re-explore that. And it tends to not throw a lot out. It keeps on, like outliers. Outliers aren't to be accounted for and put to the side. They're really to be explored. So there's different forms of realism. And if anybody here big into realism? No? So right, we're going to skip, because you don't really need to know about Bashkar. But there's two different schools of thought. And the one that I use is Pawson and Tilley's. It's called scientific or empirical or emergent or middle range or analytical realism. It would help if we had one name, but this is what it's called. And so it recognizes that social programs and social inquiry happens in a system that is very dependent upon people. It's complex and it's diverse, and it recognizes that. And it constantly looks for explanations and other explanations for why it happened to you, but it didn't happen to you. Why yours is different, why mine is different. So as I said, interested in programs. And the question it asks is, what is it about the program that generates change? So that's where you start by thinking, what is it about this program that actually generates change? I challenge you to think about, it could be your day-to-day practical work. It can be a study that you're involved in. It can be something about how you're educating students. And think about, what do you think about you? What about me standing here talking to you about realist evaluation is expected to change anything in you? That's kind of questions you want to think. And then it's structured around context, mechanisms, and outcomes. And so when you're studying, you're researching, and you're doing mixed methods, methodologies are the name of the game in realist evaluation, qualitatively and quantitatively using the data of a program, program specs, program documents, any data they have on people who have been through the program already, patient outcomes, and then interviewing and some key stakeholders, focus groups, surveys, questionnaires with focus group or with key stakeholders to try to generate those senses of what did they expect to happen. How do you expect this to work? What do you see in practice when it rolls out? Looking at that early data from the a program to try to see what looks like it might be happening, and to form them into theories that can be tested based around the context, outcomes, and mechanisms. And so mechanisms are a funky little thing to get your brain around. Mechanisms are believed to be mechanisms lie under the surface. They're not visible. It lies in the reasoning of people. So it's how people reason and react to resources that you put in as part of a program. So if we go back to Pawson and Tilley's domestic violence, very public shaming for the first group. The reasoning of the person who was publicly shamed is that they have lost, from their work, is that they have lost status in their community. It's had an impact potentially on their employment, on their role within the community, and their membership of community groups. And that is the mechanism that stimulates a change in behavior. The context that they were in was a high income, highly connected, local social community in which the people who were being very publicly arrested, that's the resource, the public, very public shaming, arresting, but it was the public shaming mechanism of what it, and the impact it had on them, what they thought it did to their social standing that changed their outcome. So that's how that's kind of what a mechanism is. It's in the reasoning and the thinking of the participants. So when you're thinking mechanism, you got to go to the noggin. You got to really think about how people are thinking. You've got to ask them about reasoning. You've got to ask them. Interviews are really carefully constructed because you're looking about connected threads. I've seen many attempts at realist evaluation that have a box over here that has context in it, a box over here that has mechanisms, and a box over here that has outcomes. If you go back to that picture of the people, the beetles in the boxes, you'll know that that's not how they worked. Some different interconnection of them led to an outcome here, led to a different outcome here, and led to a different outcome here. And so when you're thinking about, how those same resources trigger something in people and how different contexts shape their thinking, it's all about what they're reasoning. So you have to be very careful when you structure interviews for realist evaluation and in analysis that you're looking for connected threads. So the analysis process also is convoluted, it's a bit long, but you're doing, so for example, work that I've just done on interprofessional student-run clinics, you're looking at the interviews that ask people, tell me about what, can you tell me what do you expect to happen to? Does the same thing happen to everyone? Have you seen different things happen to different students or different patients who go through the program? If they say yes, you're going, okay, tell me a little bit about that. And if they don't automatically, they often automatically tell you the why, then you're questioning about the why. Okay, is there anything that's different that happened to that person? Is there anything different in the context that you think might have shaped? Is there anything different about them that might have shaped it? So it's in analysis, you're looking for the connected threads, not groups of. So something where you're not looking to thematically analyze and come up with key themes. You're actually coming up with threads, connected threads of in this, you deliver this in this context, it kicks in this mechanism, this reasoning for a person and leads to this outcome. So context, I mentioned those. Context can be something in the individual. It can be something in interrelationships between people. Sonia Dalkin did a beautiful study of the use of palliative care registries by physicians. And what they recognized is they weren't getting the referrals in for palliative care that they had expected. They weren't getting for hospice care and things like that. They just weren't getting the number of referrals that they expected. They had a great service, they're not getting the referrals. They started to explore why using a realist evaluation approach. And really, when they came down to it, there was a very clear context that shaped whether a physician would refer or not for people who didn't have a diagnosis of cancer. For people with a diagnosis of cancer, they referred them right through because they thought in their head, I know the trajectory. There's a set trajectory of what happens to people with cancer, and I know the patterns of what will happen, so I'm comfortable, referring that person through to palliative care. For people who had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, significant chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, they were less certain about the trajectory of care. And so they didn't refer them in for palliative care because they didn't know if they get better, they might pick up, they might not. So it was the trajectory, not their feelings and perceptions about the trajectory of care. So, so two different conditions, very different trajectories, led to very different referral rates into the services for people because it related to the reasoning that the physicians had about what was going to happen to those people. So context can be individuals, interrelationship, institutions, infrastructures, and it's a difficult thing for people to get around because they think geography. When you think context, they say geography. It's where it is, but it's not. It's about how people interact. It's about having a sense. Some of my work has been about having a sense of equal status. That's not a structural geographical thing. And then, as I say, you're looking for outcome patterns. And all of that feeds into these little CMOC theories. So just a little summary. This is what a mechanism is, context, an outcome pattern, and a CMOC theory. And as you can see, the little contexts here are the things that are thought to trigger mechanisms. So when you have them, a mechanism fires or is enhanced. When you don't have those contexts, the mechanism is not fired. It's still there. The capacity for a mechanism is still there, which means if you do some work with a program in one setting, the likelihood is that the mechanisms are still there in another setting, but you may not have the context that will trigger them. So you're looking a lot at context when you're doing realist evaluation. And that's kind of how they usually depict them, with mechanisms intervening on some kind of trajectory for a resource that you've put in, but the context completely shapes what happens to the outcomes. And this, it's little and a bit blurry, my apologies for that, but I don't need you to look at it in detail. This is what your output after analysis kind of looks like. These are some of my CMOC theories developed from those interprofessional student-run clinic. So it has, it'll have a resource and how that resource, what contexts are applied in that resource, how it affects the reasoning, that's the mechanism reasoning for the person, and how that triggers outcomes. And so things like for students who have a first exposure to an interprofessional student-run clinic, they judge everything about the success of that experience by contact time with patients. If they don't get contact time with patients in that first clinic exposure, they don't come back. If they have contact time with patients, they return to volunteer again. But they also, if they don't have contact time with patients, they view all the preparatory time that they've had. It's about 4 to 6 hours of HIPAA and all the rest of it to get into the clinic. They view all that as a waste. The students who have high contact time with students view that they were very well prepared because they had all this preparation. And the students who don't see patients think the clinic itself is poorly organized, but the students who have high contact see the clinic as highly organized. But it all roots around how students value their time. And so the mechanism is actually students' judgments about time. They have limited time, it's a precious resource. And so if you want to make a clinic successful, you got to guarantee first shot in the door, they're getting a lot of patient contact. They get a lot of patient contact, your trajectory for the students is very different. And probably people in clinical environments with students know that really well. But it allows you then to look at the data that you collect on a program. You can collect your data about students who came in, returners, non-returners, and the number of patients that they saw on each visit to see if that theory holds water. Yeah, so that's how it's a really simplistic one, but it's just an example of what you get from realist evaluation. So this is the realist cycle. So you start with some theory that hopefully it might be articulated. 99% of the time it's not. You're having to piece it together. So you start with some theory. You start to do some theory building. where you start to create those CMOC theories, what might work for whom in which circumstances. And then you actually go, you observe, you do multi-method data collection and analysis on CMOC theories. So you start to observe, collect data, do retrospective audits are really, really good, because once you know, okay, if an idea is that students or patients who come into an interprofessional clinic, see lots of interprofessional examples here, tell you what I know. Patients who come into an interprofessional clinic theoretically get more holistic whole person care because they have access to a wider range of interconnected healthcare providers. And that better care leads them to identify more of their health issues beyond what they came to the clinic for. And that having more of their issues identified allows them to have more of their needs met. Really easily to go in, get data on that from the records within the clinic. Very easy to go in and pull patients, assessment of the patients who were seen by an interprofessional team or came into an interprofessional clinic, the number of identified issues that students had from that first assessment, the referrals and connections to other professions, the number, and so you can see if they're coming in for, I have a sinus infection, they're treated for a sinus infection and they're gone. Or if it's truly holistic, they come in for a sinus infection because they're having a more holistic evaluation. You're identifying that they also, a lot of people coming into community health centers, very high proportion have depression. And so you're identifying, oh, they also have depression. They're being seen by psychology. They're, you know, where's those connections? So really, really easy to check through the documentation you already have. So that's how developing a CMOC theory guides you then to what you're going to look at in your data. I'm always interested in the dental clinic because after I've talked to Victoria Michaels about this several times, so encourage her. When you added social work in the dental clinic, I'm really interested to see what it did to patients' ability to complete treatment. Yes, I'm glad of that because I've been going on at her for, I've been going, Victoria, you need to think about it, because that's the whole idea. That's your underlying theory, is that adding social work to a dental clinic helps people complete their needed dental treatment and addresses other issues in their lives. But you're trying to deal with those financial, it's often financial, and what are those financial complications and how can a social work assist with that? So it's kind of another clear example. Oh, I'm delighted at that. And so then you're looking program, you're trying to get more specific about the program, identifying, okay, what now? I'm starting to really see, I've got evidence now of what works for whom, which might make you go back and revise or change your theories. And you keep going through this little cycle as you evolve your theories with that sense of we've only ever got partial knowledge. That's a realist belief. You're always building, you've got partial knowledge. And so I'll finish on this one. We'll have some questions. And I just love this Stephen Hawking quote because it's, you know, where this kind of quote made me feel comfortable stepping out of a purely quantitative world and putting my foot in the realist evaluation world, because it, you know, I was always a fan of Kant and his, you know, ideas about, you know, all theories are, you know, only there to be disproved, but we somehow drift away from that when we think very positively and we start to believe that things are, this is true, you know, this is true knowledge, this is true because multiple randomized controlled trials have shown it. And then somewhere down the road, it's like, oops, sorry, we were a little misguided on that one. Now we think it's like the cardiac disease fats, now it's cardiac disease sugars, and you know, it's that, you know, partial truth. So I think that really helps kind of with a realist perspective to say you're constantly out there trying to generate new understanding to make whichever program or intervention that you're looking at as successful as you can make it. And that's the bottom line. You really learn from this approach, how to go back and morph and shape and change programs or change interventions to make them. So it's kind of got a little audit sense to it too, which is useful.
Thanks everyone for coming. I have a couple of announcements to make though, that I'm going to send out an email by Friday that just looks at what we've done this year, see if there's anything else you'd like to do. Mostly I get good feedback, but we want to get more people involved in research and give them the tools to do that, and encouragement, mentorship, whatever. So maybe there's some other things we could do, offer a more basic level of presentations on statistics or data analysis or something. But so I'll send that out. And then on unrelated matters, this is just science interesting to me, my inner 10-year-old, that a tick was found frozen in amber, 99 million years old. So I thought we could start cloning dinosaurs now. We finally got to the... And tonight is the peak of the Geminid meteor shower, which is the only meteor shower we know of that's created from an asteroid. So the meteors are slower coming into the atmosphere. They give us longer streaks. And we live in a great place for that. And then the last thing is that the North Pole is melting at a rate greater, it's warming at a rate greater than the rest of the planet. We all know that climate change is a fraud, but I'm just saying that nonetheless, and in spite of whatever, this is releasing thawing out caribou who died of anthrax back in the early 20th century. So we'll have to keep an eye on our epidemiologists. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you so much.